Today's daf is daf Lamed Gimel Amid Aleph. Actually, we're up to the very bottom of the page. So the last thing we learned was a machlekes between Rebbe and the Chachamim. When one says Shema, our Mishnah says you can say it any language you want. Because Shema b'chol lashon she'ata shemeya. We have a special word that tells us that you can say it in any language you want as long as you understand. And Rebbe holds that Shema is coming to teach you that you have to listen to what you are saying, and the word v'hayu tells you hayu hadvarim that it should be the way it was written in Lashon Kodesh. So the fact that Rebbe needs a special limud that Shema has to be said in Lashon Kodesh means or implies, had it not been that extra word v'hayu, we would have thought you can read Shema in any language that you want, because Rebbe, the Gemara surmises now, the Rebbe holds that the entire Torah can be said in any language. And the Rabbanon who need a special pasuk Shema b'chol lashon she'ata shemeya seems implies that had it not been for that pasuk, you would have thought it has to be in Hebrew, because the entire Torah has to be done in Hebrew. And that's what the Gemara is going to discuss now. Lema, at the very bottom of the page, on base. Lema, let us say, Kesava Rebbe's of the opinion, Kol HaTorah, Kula the entire Torah b'chol lashon nemra is said in any language. And that's why you need a special limud for Rebbe that here in Shema it has to be said only in Hebrew. Because these are that's Lashon Kodesh. I mean, you can say the entire Lashon Kodesh, what do you need a special limud v'hayu? Says Gemara, that's no proof. You know why you need the limud v'hayu? Read the entire Torah can be said in any language you want. But because it's a Shema, you would have thought that Krishma can also be said in any language. Or you can say forget. Really, the entire Torah can only be done in Hebrew. When it comes to Shema, you would have thought that it should be said in any language. You can say it in any language because it says the word Shema. So therefore, when you need a pasuk v'hayu, Shema is no different than anywhere else. Itzim should exceed Shema. Okay, now let's see forget the other way around. Lema kasav Rabbanan hold kol Torah kol Lashon Kodesh in Lashon Kodesh, because these are that b'chol lashon in any language. Shema because normally one is special limud Shema. You can say Kishma in any language, and Torah can be said in any language. So says no proof either. Itzich, you know why? Really, the entire Torah can be said in any language, but we would have thought Shema is an exception because it says v'hayu. Should exceed v'hayu. Now, what exactly does the Gemara mean when it says kol HaTorah kula b'chol lashon nemra? What mean? What's that going on? So here we have a fascinating machlekes. A quick introduction. We generally say that this takana of reading the Torah every 3 days came from Moshe and Ezra. Big machlekes are showing him exactly what was Moshe's input and what was Ezra. In fact, if you look at Teisus the Shantz, Moshe doesn't even get a look in. He just says that Ezra was masakin to read the Torah. Many of the Shem hold that Moshe Rabbeinu said you should read the Torah every 3 days, but Ezra says 10 psukim, 3 aliyahs, the details. Others say Moshe Rabbeinu said every 3 days, and Ezra added Mincha of Shabbos. Others say, see right here in Teisus Shantz, that Ezra did the entire what's called, as it says right here, the fourth line. The Ein Chiyuv element of Rabbanim, the takana is Ezra. Moshe doesn't get a look in. It was only Ezra who gave us this takana. So what's this kol HaTorah? So Teisus in brachas, and here Teisus Shantz and other Rishonim, Teisus Rosh and others say that it's talking about Parsha Zachar. Parsha Zachar is the only parsha that they have to read Mahat Torah, and that's what the Gemara means. That kol HaTorah b'chol lashon nemra means that Parsha Zachar you read, that you have to be dafke Parsha Zachar. In Hebrew it can be in any language. So no, that's how we get that the Rishonim hold Mahat Torah. You have to hear Parsha Zachar, and you have to read Parsha Zachar. You don't have to say it yourself. You have to actually read it from a Torah. Teisus there in brachas also adds Parshas Parah. The Rosh there adds Parshas Parah. Some want to say it's a mistake. In fact, in Shulchan Aruch it says v'yesh aymin Parshas Parah. However, Rashi says right here 2 lines to the top. Very important Rashi. Rashi says kol HaTorah b'chol lashon nemra likreis bebeis hakneses. He doesn't limit it to Parshas Zachar or Parshas Parah. So the Bach learns from here that Rashi holds that Mahat Torah, we have to read the Torah every Shabbos. In fact, the Ritva Megillah Daf Zayin says the same thing. So we have a number of Rishonim who hold that Kriyas HaTorah on Shabbos is Mahat Torah from the Lashon Kol HaTorah Kol HaTorah B'chol Lashon Nemra. Others want to say, and that it's talking about to be yotze the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, learning Torah. You can only be yotze the mitzvah of Talmud Torah if you say in Hebrew. If you say in Lashon Kodesh. If you don't say in Lashon Kodesh, you're not yotze the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. We're talking about Chumash because obviously the Gemara itself is written in Aramaic. We're talking about Torah Shabbat. You're not yotze the mitzvah of Talmud Torah unless you say it in Hebrew. Others say we're talking about these psukim that the Mishnah said can only be said in Lashon Kodesh, like Bikurim and all that, or Chalitza. That's what we're talking about over here. Whether you say Hebrew or not. Okay, so these are different opinions. Go back to the Gemara. Says the Gemara further, tefillah davening can be said in any language. We're davening rachmihu. Since and the Gemara explains, since the whole idea of davening is to daven to the Eibush, and as the Eibush for rachmim. So kol hechad by matzli. Any way you want, you can daven because you have to understand. You're asking the Eibush for help. Obviously, it has to be in the language that you understand. So the Gemara, but tefillah b'chalosh. You're telling me you can daven any language. You're having more Shabbos. When Rabbi Yehuda said, le'elam al yishal adon trochav b'lashon aramis. You should never ask for your personal needs in lashon Aramis or b'chlal daven in the language of Aramis. And right now we're understanding Aramis is not limited to Aramis. Any language, knowledge of Kaddish, don't daven in. So what do you tell me you can daven in any language? And Rabbi Yechon said, when you daven, you need malach matatron to go ahead and to elevate your tefillas to Shemayim. Because they don't understand other languages. So what do you tell me you can daven in any language you want? Like kasha. And we discussed yesterday about Riches, what's you should daven in a language or not, what's better. Hebrew, not understanding, or English, yes, understanding. Like kasha. Very important. Like kasha. Depends if you're davening on your own or you're davening in a minion. Why? If you daven, as Rashi explained, you daven in a minion, you don't need a malach, you don't need an intercessor to go ahead and to take your tefillahs and deliver it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Eibush himself is there. So if you daven the lashon you can daven in any language you want, and we actually have parts of davening which are in Aramaic. But if you daven b'chidus, you cannot daven any language other than lashon Kaddish. We'll come back to this big machlekes in a minute of the Rishonim. The Gemara, let's first finish the sugya. Says the Gemara, you're telling me malach paket, do not recognize Rami. Just interesting. First, we start off saying you're telling me they understand the language it can be, and now you say you tell me you don't understand the language. Of course they do. But time we learn, Yechin wants heard a voice ring out from heaven in the Kodesh Kedoshim. So this is the time when Eden was threatened by the Greeks and so on. So this is what the Baskel said. Notchu Talia, the young people here, they won the war. The Ozul and Tuchya, they went out to have a war against Tuchya, the Kohanim, these are the Chashmonaim. They went out for the Syrians right before Yom Kippur, and the war was waged on Yom Kippur itself. And Yechon the Kohen Gadol heard a baskel ring out from Kohen Yoshim that the Kohenim just won. And what language was it? In Aramaic. And the baskel, we're assuming, is delivered through Malachim. It's not Nevi'is, because Nevi'is stopped in the second base of Mikdash. We know Nevi'is Chagas Chaim Malach with the last Nevi'im. So this is a baskel, Malachim, number one. Number two, Shimon Tzadik. Another story happened with Shimon Tzadik. The Mefarshim wonder why Shimon Tzadik's story is after Yechon and Kohen Gadol, when Yechon and Kohen Gadol was 200 years after Shimon Tzadik. Shimon Tzadik was the first Kohen Gadol in the second base of Mikdash, and Yechon and Kohen Gadol was much later on. So they think maybe Shimon Tzadik is somebody else, all kinds of opinions. Sheshama Baskel, you heard of Baskel that said, but Tailit Avidatum, that they just won the war. The Omar, our enemies said, they said they're going to go attack the base of Mikdash, and yet Venera Gaskaltum, this person called Gaskalgum was the king or a general, something from Greek. He was killed. All the decrees were abolished. And because for Isisha, they wrote down exactly what time that Baskel came out, and they saw that's exactly what happened. That person died exactly. By Hurrah with Stalin. Exactly when the Baskel came out, that's when this person died. It was again Baskel is through a malach. We're going to give two answers. Everybody say Baskel is different. The purpose of Baskel is that you should understand. It's a message, and because the purpose is a message, therefore it had to be said in the language. Or but that doesn't really explain it. I mean, malachim do understand it. That's the Raya Rosh. That could be. The Rosh says, come back to the Rosh, but I think this is the basis for the Rosh's shitta. The boy say, "Oh, Gabriel had Mala Gabriel." We know understand a new language as we're going to learn in Gemara. Amamar. We're going to learn later on that Bo Gabriel Valindu Shivim Lashon, that Gabriel taught Yosef Atzadik 70 languages. So obviously they knew all the languages, and 70 languages must include also Aramit or Bechal, other languages. Now. So what we have, halach l'mais, big machlekes in the Rishonim how to understand this Gemara here. So right now, two of the opinions out of the three believe it's all languages. You cannot daven any other language unless you're davening in a minyan, Unless you're davening in a minyan, then you can daven in other languages because you don't need a malach. But if you're not davening with a minyan, you cannot daven in any other language. Now, so opinion number one is you cannot daven any English. In fact, that's when the tradition says it's also to daven in other languages. Probably basing on that. Opinion number two is it's only shoyl tzrachav. No, but the text of davening you can daven any language, whether b'tzibur or b'yachid. But not in the Nusach Sfar, not in our Nusach Arizal, but in the Ashkenaz Sidurim, in the middle of every bracha of Shemoneh Esrei, there's a part you can say. In Rufa'enu, you can add in the bracha itself, whatever you want to add in. Not just Shmakalenu, in Rufa'enu and every other bracha. So they're saying that those words, the extra words that you want to put in for your personal needs, cannot depends. If you're davening in a minyan, you can say it in any language you want. But if you're davening at home, you cannot say it in English. You have to say it in Lashon Kodesh. Shoyel Tzrachav. Says right here the word is Tzrachav. That's opinion number two. Opinion number three is the Rosh. The Rosh says that the Malachim understood all languages. It's only Aramit and the problem with Aramit is they don't like it. Now, why don't they like it? It doesn't say. But it would seem because it's a butchered up Hebrew. Aramit is very much like Hebrew. No, Shin becomes a tough and all that. And that's not nice. If it's to create a new language is one thing. Even though all languages originally emanate from Hebrew, as it says in Rashi Chumash by Dara Floga, that from there they spread. Everyone's talking Kaddish, and then it spread. Okay, but this is the closest. It's just like embarrassing the Lashon Kaddish. You're already speaking similar. The Rosh doesn't say those words. I'm just adding it in to give some hezbollah maybe. Now, how does the Rosh say know that? Because the first answer to the Gemara is that the Baskel, because they have to explain, which really means that the Malachim know all the languages, including Aram. They don't like using it. Here they had no choice because they wanted the people to understand what they were saying. They had no choice to say it. And maybe that's where the Rosh gets it from. What's most fascinating is the Ravid, which nobody brings. The Ravid, none of them unfortunately will bring it, but the Ravid in the Sefer called Tamim Deng, which is his truth. The Ravid writes the following, fascinating thing. He says that they don't. This Gemara is also in Shabbos Beis. There talks about that if you go visit a sick person, big chaylim, you can actually daven in Aramis because the Shechina is l'mayla meroisha shel chayla, and if you're talking directly to the Shechina. In fact, it's saying this for him why Hey Lach Ma'anya begins in Aramaic. Why we start the whole Agod in Aramaic and then we go back to Lashon Kodesh? What's the point? First two lines in Aramaic. They say because Aramaic can only be said if the Shechina is there. So we're establishing the fact that by the Seder, the Eibush himself is there, not just Malachim here. And that's why we have the opening address in Aramaic, and then we go back to Lashon Kodesh. Says the Ravid. Of course, cases in Shabbos, if you basically ask the question, he doesn't understand. If Malachim know your machshavos, they don't understand other languages. I mean, what does it even mean? You're made of Tzorchin. Says the Ravid. Of course, Malachim understand languages. But of course, they understand Aramish, understand everything. But what happened was, he said, after the Churban by Sishin, they all went to Babel, and they wanted to mingle. In fact, we know the Eden lived very well in Babel. They all became officers of the government. They started talking the language, Goyish. They all started talking Babylonian, and they were forgetting Lashon Kodesh. People were becoming Amaratzim. They didn't know how to learn Chumash. Within a generation, they were Chacham Rila. Within a generation, they'll be wiped out. There'll be any more chinuch. They'll be everything forgotten. So they had to scare the parents into making sure they teach the kids alibes, they teach them how to read Lashon Kodesh, so they could open a Chumash and any other sefer and learn. So they came up with this wild, radical statement. The Malachim don't understand Aramish. And that, the Eden was still, all frum. So therefore they got scared and they made sure they taught the kids alibes and everything else. That's where it comes from. Which actually makes a lot of sense. But anyway, that's what the Ravid says. And therefore, of course, the Ravid says, of course, you can daven in any language you have to daven. What's interesting is the Mishnah Berurah therefore says, during COVID, you all daven at home. The Mishnah Berurah says, you don't say any of the Yukon Perkins. Any of them, because you're at home alone. Our Siddur, the Chabad Siddur, is very interesting how it evolved. In the old Siddurim, we don't say the second Yom Kippur, and or Misha Berach. Now, Misha Berach is not saying it has nothing to do with our Ramish, it's because who you mentioned, you're alone. We don't say the second Yom Kippur, I guess, because it's the first one is about Rosh Hashiv and everything else, so that's like standard text. But in the old Siddurim, which is one I have at home, so I noticed it. It says, Yochid HaMispal Einu Omer. You're not supposed to say it. All the new Siddurim, it says, Yochid HaMispal Einu Tzorich Lo. They added a word here. Don't know where it came from. They added a word. It's very different. You don't have to say it. If you want to, you can. What does that mean? Which means it has nothing to do with Aramish. Because if it's Aramish, then you can't. If it's Einu Tzorich means, what's the point? You're living alone. There's nobody around. Who you benching? It's a different thing altogether. Curious what happened and how the Siddur changed. But anyway, so that's the story with Arams. Let's go on. No, let me just go up. Just Ein Tzarich. But this is the old Siddur. Ein Oimer. Could be. Okay. Let's continue. So further. So that's the story there. Anyway, how do you know benches in any language you want? You can bench any way you want. There's no pasuk for it because, and the idea is, as the Rishonim say, this is not a bracha like the Hagrizim Harevos. This is a thank you, and you say thank you. Any language you express your gratitude is good enough. Interesting, but the trace of the shots adds in the very end of the page, the last 5 lines. Interesting what he says here. When he's talking about birchas hamazon in any language, he says yesh omer. Some say the pshat that we're talking about should tzadich levarich balabayis. You know that in benching you say, you know, whatever Yosef bench, you know, Ovidimi, and in Nusach Ashkenaz you add also everybody else. So yeah, it's talking about here that bracha that you give to the balabayis. The chesiva rachta es the es ribayu. Es is coming to include not only the Eibusha but also the family. The rabbis is balabayis, and that is what we're talking about here. You can say in any language as well. Interesting. Okay, thinking about it further. The Mishnah says Shavuos is any language. That means the guy said to him, "I swear that you haven't. I heard that you saw. I need your testimony to back me up." And obviously, you don't want to get involved. So the guy makes you swear. The guy swears, "I swear that you don't have any ages." And then he did, and then turned out to be a liar. He brings a carbon because he swore false. He didn't swear. He said only false, and you have to do carbon over the ages. How do I know Shavuos in any language? Is the shvur that the other person made the sleep? Because it says in pasuk, the nefesh kesechta b'shama koil olah, and he heard this, you know, koil olah. He heard that the shvur, and he really witnessed it, and he refuses to be involved. Any language anyway. Shavuos epikadnim, which is again somebody said, I gave you something to mind for me. Asya sechta sechta mishvus eidus. Learn that from Shavuos eidus. Now the mission continues. The following can only be said in Kodesh Mikra. Bikurim, Chalitza Psukim, you say by Bikurim, and the Psukim that you say by Chalitza, the woman said by Chalitza, Ad Mikra Bikurim, then Mishnah says, Keita, how's it work? Because it says the passing the Anisa of the Amart, because it's both in the Amart to be selling Keita. How do you know? We learn out from Har Gerizim and Har Egel. There's a about no Amr, this was Keita. How do we know over there? How long they've been on the Mani and Mullah just like my Hagizim Hareva, but some pages, outcomes are pages. New living to find how do you know over there is lost page? Maybe they said in a different language. Asya, it's hard to understand that because what language did you even speak in the middle? Why would they speak any other language but Lashon Kodesh? You're only alone. Right? They had one language, they all spoke Lashon Kodesh. So they were in the middle and they had nothing to do with anybody else. Obviously, there's Polish and Kaddish. So what are you asking about Hagrizim, Hareva, Haino is a Hebrew? What do you need a pasuk for? It's obvious that there's okay. Well, why would you talk a language they don't understand? I don't know. But anyway, if you have a pasuk as well, could we want to use it to learn other things as well? We learn out koil Moshe. We learn out koil from Moshe. How do we learn koil from Moshe? See, here it says koil. Here it says that Levim said to Eden Koil with a loud voice. Use the word koil. Over there it says Bahar Sinai. It says that the koil shofar went stronger and so on and so forth. And Moshe Yidaber Kinyan and Koil. Is Malam Kodesh over there? Kodesh because we have the words in the Torah exactly what David just said. That's how we know Kodesh as well. Chalitza Ketzad. How you know Chalitza? But Rabbanon. We had the Mishnah Machlekes Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanon say the same thing, and Rabbi Yehuda says because it says also the word kocha. You have the word kocha. But Rabbanon says it says va'onsa ve'amra. Same thing, you know, onsa ve'amra. So therefore we know that has been Kaddish. Rabbi Yehuda is not happy with that, satisfied. He says there's one more word, kocha, like this. In other words, exactly the way it's written in the Torah in Hebrew. But Rabbanon high kocha. What it says Rabbanon don't need the word kocha. What do they use the word kocha? Which seems to be superfluous. The boilu they need the doubleshu ma'isa makkah. You know what holds back? You know what? If this one thing, if she doesn't do. She's not Yotze. If she doesn't spit and doesn't tie the shoe, she's not Yotze. But if she doesn't say the psukim, she's still Yotze. Actually, the machlek is about regarding spitting, but that's how we learn over here. Only something that anything that has a ma'isa is ma'ashir. Spitting including the ma'isa. But how did you learn that out? He could have said, by saying kacha, the extra chaf. Rabbanon, koi kochel mashlo. You had before the extra hey, the extra chaf. They don't learn these extra letters. So now I'm going to ask a question. Rabbi Yehuda. Hi, the answer. What does he do for the answer? We had before Gzeda Shabbat, right? We learned out answer from the Bikurim and all that. What do they do with it? Lag from Levim, Hargrim Harevo. Lag Mude, the Levim, the Beloshna Kodesh. How do you know that the other way around? How do you know that Abel Hagrizim is the Beloshna Kodesh? We learn from here. Now, according to Yehuda, it's difficult to understand. Why do we need to know? We hold we need to know what language Levim gave the brachas to, because that's what we learn everything else from. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're learning from the Kacha and the Gzera Shabbos to tell you what the Levim did in Hagrizim Harevo, Madahava, which is a question we're asked a number of times. You know, what's the difference to us what language they said it? Not sure. So the Gemara, Lele Koil Mimoshe. Why don't they just, what does he need to learn? Let's learn Lei Levim, Koil Koil Mimoshe. Ani a gomer, Koil Gomer. So we're saying over here that he learned, he had a Gzeda Shabbat, and Gzeda Shabbat is something you cannot devise on your own. A hekesh you can't, a kabuchayim you can't. Gzeda Shabbat, he had to be passed down from your Rebbe. And his Rebbe never told him about Koil. Therefore, he couldn't learn from Moshe Rabbeinu regarding over here by what do you call it? By the Levim. To say what by the Levim was only pages because Koil from Moshe. He never heard such a Gzeda Shabbat. He needs the Gzeda Shabbat to learn Levim from over here, from by Yavama, by Chalitza, and that's why here. Interesting, because Tosfos in Shabbos and other places says that Lav Davka they were told which Gzeda Shabbos. They were just given a number of Gzeda Shabbos. They were told, let's say, 100 Gzeda Shabbos in the Torah, and then they had to work out which ones they were. But here the Gemara clearly seems to be saying that it's not only the number, but exactly which word was used. And he never heard those words, Koil, so he couldn't therefore rely on that. Talking about further, whatever it says, Koi, Koch, Ani, Bamida, Enos, Milos, Kaidish, Koi, we know when it comes to by Bichas Kainim, right? So therefore we know that has to be Hebrew. Koch, the Chalit has to be Hebrew. Ani, Bamida, Levim. So you see clearly from here, what does he use by Levim? Not Koil, but Ani and Amida. Talking about okay, so keep now we're going to talk about what actually happened there across the Yarden. Now, just to bear in mind, Tosfos in the next page on the Dalman base tells us, and I actually saw it when I was down at the scroll, that the entire width of the Yarden was 50 amos. So if you think about it, you didn't even have to have a splitting of the Yarden because you have so many Eden walking through. You know, you could have 50 amos. And when we were there now, the guide, like all these guides, we know exactly where the Eden crossed. He showed us a place, and it was very, very narrow, probably even narrower than 50 amos. You saw that? You think of it? Yep. So Tosfos actually says it was 50 amos wide, the whole thing. And then you got to work out the Eden were 12 mil wide, 12 mil in depth. And Yeshua spoke to the Eden while they were all inside the water. How did that work out exactly? So that's a long case of trying to figure out tomorrow. Maybe we'll talk about it. But to bear that in mind. Says the Gemara, okay, first of all, where exactly, remember we learned they set up the stones and everything else. Where exactly with Hagrizim? What happened here? Big machlekes and very radically different from each other, and goes as follows. So what learned? It says in Pasuk, it says in the Bar, that they were told where's Hagrizim and where's Har Abel. They were told they're the other side of the Yarden, and where the Elech. So they're way beyond the Yarden. It was far, far away. In fact, we're going to learn later, 60 kilometers, 60 million away from the Yarden. And we explain. It says in the pasuk, derech mevoy hashemesh, far away from where mevoy hashemesh. Where mevoy hashemesh? Shemesh is when the sun, when the sun rises. Where does the sun rise? On the east side. When they were going, they were all on the east, right? The Transjordan is the east side of Yisrael, and they were going into the west, Yisrael. So the far away from the east, 60 kilometers past the Yarden, you're going to go, and that's where Hagrizim and Har Abel is. So then when the sun shines, and then the pasuk says, "The Eretz Haknani in the land of Kanani, Hayoshe Barabba that's sitting in the flat plains, Elu Hagrizim Har Abel. That's where Hagrizim and Har Abel is. Sheyoshe Bem Kusim, the nation of Kusim, the Samaritans. That's where they were, and we found on Hagrizim they were worshiping this this idol. Mul Hagilgul." Samach Gilgal. Now this is a bit of a problem because Gilgal is actually near the Yarden. How can they be far away? Hagidon Harabel, Samach Gilgal, next to the Gilgal. So it's a big problem exactly how they were next to Gilgal. In fact, we'll see later more. One opinion that they went 120 mil in one day, a nest. They traveled 60 mil in the day, then they came back 120 mil in one day, which is impossible, but as a nest, they all somehow managed to do that. Other Gesayis, whatever. Then it says the other Gesayis that Mul is not Samach, but Mul means opposites of just far away. Eitzel Eloine Mamre, near Eloine Maida, and we learned before Ed Shem. And we heard the story of Abraham, it says in Mishnah. Well, the Halem, it says right here, what? Shem. Tanya, we learned. In other words, that's where Hagrizim Hareva was far, far away from the Yarden. Tanya learned that Rabbi Rabbi Yesi. Rabbi Yesi said, the Dovers in this thing, Zayafti Sifre Kusim. In this thing here, that you guys, they took a Sefer Torah, you corrupted the Sefer Torah. They believe in Torah Shabbat, they didn't believe in Torah Shabbat. The only way they know that Eloi Moira is Shem is because you have a Gzeir Shabbat, but they don't believe in Gzeir Shabbat. If it's not documented, clearly in the Torah, it's not true. And yet they put in, they added the word Shem. So he said, you guys falsified your Sefer Torah. You falsified your Torah. How do you know that the Eloi Moira is Shem? We know from Gzeir Shabbat. How in the world do you know it is Shem? Okay, more continue further. Rabbi Lazar says he learned very different. He dashes as follows. He learned that Hagrizim Hareba were right next to the yard, which is hard to understand because we know that Hagrizim Hareba, there's no mountains right next to the yard. There's nothing really there. Others say with little mounds. Doesn't say anywhere there was a big mountain. It was little mounds, or they even created little mounds. And somehow or another, they managed to put 300,000 people on one of these mountains and 300,000 people on another mountain, which is a bit difficult to practically understand, picture what happened here. But anyway, it says over here, so it says, it says, okay, if you can tell me it's far away, he teaches he doesn't mean sun rises, the sun sets. The sun sets in the west, and it's far away from the west. So where is it? On the east. As soon as you cross the Yarden. Where the sun sets, and it's far away from there. So where is it? Right in the east. The Eretz HaKanani, Eretz Chivihi. Eretz HaKanani doesn't really mean Eretz Kanani, it's actually the land of Chivi, because Shem belongs to Chivi. Shem was from the Chivi. Ayeshe Baraba and plains, L'chayre Valei Ben Harim Begvois and Yoshvin, L'chayre must be mountains because Hagrizim and Harabel. Mul Hagilgul Vahalei Ro Hagilgul. Mul Hagilgul sounds like far. Now we're saying sound like far away from Gilgul, but they were not. They were right there. So different one answers you right. Rabbi Yaakov says Rabbi Lazar has to rely because some of these signs just don't make sense if it don't add up if it's right next to the Yarden. So Rabbi Lazar relies on Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov. This is Rabbi Lazar ben Shimon, and he relies on Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov, which Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov actually lived after him. So Rabbi Lazar himself already had the same opinion, but Rabbi Yaakov is the one who's recorded for saying it, and that is that these signposts were signposts how to travel to get to their destinations, to Yericha and all that. Nothing to do with saying where Hagrizim and Hareba, and that is, and why you need all these signposts? Because in the midbar they had the Nani HaKavod, who basically led them, they just follow blindly. The Nani HaKavod ended when Moshe Rabbeinu was in the Stalik and Zayin Oder. So now they needed directions. Rabbi Yaakov to show them how to go the second crossing, which is the Yarden, versus the first one by Kriyas Yamsuf. Just like he showed them in the first time around. You go on this road, so well like follows. But then if you go on the road, don't cross the field in the wilderness. Go through the settlements, don't go through the wilderness. And the plateau, Don't walk on the mountain, but walk in the flat plains. So that's what it was, signpost, not telling you where the Hagrid Able is, just telling you how to get to your destination. So the Gemara, we learned. How did they go? How did they cross the Yarden? The whole every day, Aaron and Sayach, and they go every day when they travel in the midbar. The Aaron always followed to the first Yehuda went, and then Reuben, and then they and right after Yehuda started going, they started preparing the Mishkan. Then Reuben started going, and then they had because it was right between those two. But on this day they were going to cross the Yamsu, the Yarden, Nosat Chila. The Aaron traveled first. Remember, as it says in Pasuk, the Aaron Abris Adoin Kola Aaron Abris Nolar Oivel Lifneichen. The Yarden crossed in front of them. The whole every single day, who carries the Aaron and the Levim? Today the Kohanim had to carry the Aaron because they're the ones who had to stand in the beginning of the Yarden. Shememar, as it says in Pasuk, as soon as they placed their feet into the Yarden, Noise Aaron Hashem says clearly who carried the Aaron? The Kohanim carried the Aaron. Time you learn, only 3 instances the Kohanim carried the Aaron. When they crossed the Yarden, and they carried out when they would circle Yericha 7 times for the walls to collapse, they circled the Aron. So we know that the Aron first was in the Mishkan. First, the Aron was 14 years while the Eden were fighting around, and then after it was one place. And afterwards, they went to Mishkan Shiloh. They were there for 350 years, approximately, or different amounts, but roughly. 350 years, and then when the Aron was taken away from there, and Eli died, he fell back to the chair, and it was taken away by the police for about 7 months. Then the Tanakh that Mishkan was destroyed, and then from there after that the police couldn't take it anymore because all the tragedy, they sent it back. Then for 20 years in this person's house. Then from there, when the Domel took it for 3 months, it was in Shleim somewhere. And then, in the meantime, they built other mishkanis, Noiv, till Shlomo killed out every single coin there, and then Gibeon. But the Aron was not there. The Aron was in Yerushalayim, the first house, and then Yerushalayim, until Shlomo Melech built the base of Mikdash, and he made a special room for it. And that, when they had the special room, that's called Hechziru Limek Koimoy. Brought him back. But Amatraxin made a special room. And then the Koinim did it. But Kivon, Sheniklu, Rav, Mayim, Chosa, Mayim, Achrein. As soon as okay, now the Gemara is going to tell us what actually happened to split the yams. So maybe we'll stop here, and we'll continue tomorrow in Mitzvah Hashem. Have a good day, everybody. You'll see.